Michigan's Children proudly presents Speaking for Kids, the podcast where we explore crucial conversations impacting the lives of all Michigan children, youth, and families, especially the most vulnerable. Join us each month as we explore public policies and issues in the best interest of our kids and families. We'll bring you lawmakers and policymakers, advocates fighting for change, and the people most affected by those decisions. With our host, Matt Gillard, President and CEO of Michigan's Children, we'll invite you to become engaged too and show you how to take action on what matters most to you. Episodes are recorded live and shared virtually on YouTube and the audio hosting sites Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify.
Well, I'm Matt Gillard, the President and CEO of Michigan's Children, and welcome to another edition of Speaking for Kids, a podcast brought to you by Michigan's Children, where we bring you hot takes and expert advice and opinions from leaders in different childhood and family issues around the state that are happening around the state of Michigan or even in Washington, D.C. Michigan currently ranks 44th in the United States on third grade reading test scores, and we're facing a serious literacy crisis here. Other states like Mississippi and even others have raised their reading scores significantly over the last decade. So the issue we're talking about today is really combined with the governor's focus on literacy as her key component and priority in this next year's budget, education budget, we really wanted to dig into what the literacy components are from an early childhood perspective and how early childhood providers play a critical role in literacy, and with the right supports and services could really be the key to helping Michigan move those numbers and get us in a better position as far as reading is. I'm pleased to be joined today, experts from varying backgrounds on this issue. First, we have Brianna Craig from Big Steps Little Feet, who's a pre-K teacher on the ground doing this work on a daily basis. And then we have Elliot Regenstein of Foresight Law and Policy, a partner at Foresight Law and Policy, who's a nationally renowned expert on early childhood issues and particularly on the education side. So, Brianna, you want to introduce yourselves first?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Brianna Craig. I teach threes and young fours every day here at Big Steps Little Feet in Ada, Michigan.
Excellent. And Elliot?
I'm Elliot Regenstein. I am a consultant based in suburban Chicago at Foresight Law and Policy, and just had a new book published called Readiness: Preparing State Early Childhood Systems for a Brighter Future. So definitely think a lot about how all the pieces fit at the state level and how to help people like Brianna not experience some of the disconnects that policy sometimes create.
We have with us Christy Callahan, who is the director at Clinton County RESA Office of Innovative Projects, and Michelle Goley, who's the project director for the Early Literacy Professional Learning Program at the Michigan Association of Intermediate School Administrators. Why don't you guys go ahead and introduce yourselves, tell a little bit about the work that you do. Christy, you want to start?
Sure, I'm happy to start. As Matt said, I'm director of the Office of Innovative Projects at Clinton County RESA, and we work basically as a contractor and grantee for the state. We administer programs that provide services for children birth through 5 throughout Michigan. I'm also on the board for the Early On Michigan Foundation, and really work to represent the interests of children birth to 3.
Excellent. And Michelle, how about you?
Yeah, so I have been with MAISA now for 2 years, and I am the project director who supports early literacy professional learning across the state for Michigan's literacy coaches and teachers and administrators. In addition to that, I am the co-chair of the Early Literacy Task Force for the state of Michigan, where we work with other organizations, including ISDs, Michigan Department of Ed, my MTSS, and we work together to think about how we can support student outcomes in literacy, increasing those outcomes, and really be a collaborative unit in the state of Michigan.
From your perspective, why are we still lagging behind, and what lessons should we learn really from other states, and what should we be focusing on in Michigan if we want to see some improvement in our reading scores?
So I think a big part of the challenge that we face is the lack of a cohesive system statewide. So we've had a lot of really powerful initiatives that have shown some promise in pockets, but they're all have tended to be in isolation. So when we think about the literacy coaching work that's happened across the state, we have seen gains when we see direct coaching cycle work happening in classrooms, but our classrooms still all are using different curricular resources. They all have a different setting in which they are trying to implement best practices within literacy and coaching. And so how we can, as a state, align, it's really promising what we see in the governor's budget and what's happened with PA 146, the literacy dyslexia laws, for us to be hitting the right spot to create that system and become much more cohesive across the state. So with things like the approved curricular lists that have recently been released by MDE in accordance with the PA 146, we now will have opportunities to coach in settings where their curriculum is fully aligned to the science of reading, and every teacher will have access to the same resources within the buildings where those coaches are supporting teachers. So really, it's about the systems work.
So when we talk about improving literacy in Michigan, how do you think that relates to the work you're doing in the pre-K classroom? And what are your thoughts on what some of the things that the state could be doing and prioritizing when we talk about supporting pre-K teachers like yourselves and really giving you the resources and the background that you need to be able to support the literacy advancements of the students that you're serving?
Yeah, it's a great question. Um, we are tuition funded here, so I think a lot of the funding pieces we get privately, which is it's great and really helpful. Fortunately, policy wise, that's all not really in my ballpark. But when it comes to kind of ground level, the way that we are supporting young children with literacy, I mean, we work with them every day. Literacy is kind of involved in everything that they're doing. And so we really try to hit those key components of language comprehension and word recognition. And so, yeah, we're reading with them all the time, communicating with them intentionally all the time. So yeah, I can kind of give you the background of more of that, what goes on in the classroom. I think maybe Elliot would be more knowledgeable on the policy level of things, but.
Absolutely. All right, Elliot, let's jump to you. So what give us kind of the latest and greatest on what's happening in the early childhood world, especially as it contains or pertains to literacy efforts?
Well, this is, I think, a really important area of connection between early learning and K-12, because the states that you're seeing the most success in early literacy, they're not just, I mean, they are certainly working on building coherent systems at the K-12 level where teachers are well supported, where there's a thesis about curriculum and implementation and a real focus on, using the right strategies with kids from the minute they walk into kindergarten, you know, so that's important. But that's not enough. I mean, as all of us who work on early childhood know, a lot of language development, brain development takes place before children enter kindergarten, and that those are really critical years. And of course, the learning in those years has to be age appropriate, right? It should be fun, it should be engaging, right? But that it is a huge opportunity to help lay the groundwork for everything that comes next. And that the states that have been the most successful are the ones who think of it that way, right? They really have an intentional strategy for early childhood, and that intentional strategy is connected to the one they have in K-12. So it's not like they've got one theory for 3 and 4-year-olds and a totally different theory for 5 to 8-year-olds. They have one theory, right, for language development from birth through 8th grade, and that when they are spending public money, they are doing it in a way that is meant to support the implementation of that theory.
Absolutely. That's this whole science of reading really approach, right? And this is what the governor has really zoomed in on and really zeroed in on and focused in her budget proposal for this next year, really pushing us forward in that direction. And we're excited to see it as well at Michigan's Children. So talk maybe a little bit more about that. So from a instructional practice, so what kinds of training, coaching, and administrative support really are actually needed to make these changes successful, to give the teachers in the classrooms the tools that they need to really, see significant impacts in increased results around literacy?
So I think probably foundationally, I would start by saying that we need to have the enabling conditions in place in a school building in order for any initiative that we put into that building to be successful. So that would include having a leadership team, having training, high quality training for educators, including the principals. The principal is the instructional leader in those buildings. We need to make sure that administrators are equipped to support their staff and their students. The coach is an integral part of what those conditions look like, ensuring there are shared commitments across the building and what it will look like in instruction in every classroom in order to really create that foundation for student learning. And then really, how can we enact the idea of getting out of classrooms and learning from one another, job embedded professional learning. So we're not just going through a training, but we're actually seeing it in action. We're looking at student data, we're interacting with teachers, and we're creating that climate that will help to build success. And a big part of that is deep, solid training in the science of reading for every teacher. And that is where you see a lot of work in the governor's budget coming forward with the letters training as an example. That's one way to provide really deep learning for teachers and will help shift from practices that maybe were not effective in the past to practices that will be highly effective in increasing student outcomes.
Yeah, so talk a little bit about that. That's a program that's gotten a lot of attention here really since in the last couple of years, I guess. But talk a little bit more specifically about what the letters training really is and how that relates to teachers in the classroom.
So it's really an opportunity for teachers to build deep knowledge of the science of reading, and it gives them a stronger understanding of how reading develops, why some students are struggling, and how to respond instructionally to those students who are struggling. Alongside the essential instructional practices that we have in early literacy in our state, it really helps to provide the framework and foundation for what every teacher can be doing in their classroom and how they can best support student outcomes. So that deep training of letters really complements the early literacy essentials, which is really 10 essentials that should be happening in every classroom every day, and will help in creating a very strong foundation that's common, consistent, and that can create those shared commitments of what we want to see for students.
But Brianna, let's talk a little bit more about from your perspective. So what are you seeing in the classroom, especially with parents and the expectation of parents, and really as you do this critical work of really preparing the young people in your care for success in school?
Yeah, absolutely. Honestly, I'm seeing a lot of kids who are really, really eager to learn. I think this age group can often be underestimated. People that aren't familiar with 2, 3, 4 year olds, they think, oh, well, they can't read yet. They kind of underestimate their abilities. But I mean, these children love to learn. And I think that's kind of a part of our partnership with parents at Big Steps is that their parents see that. And so, I mean, even this month, just with National Literacy Month, we're having a lot of parents coming in and reading to the class. We're having a librarian come from our local library. And so we're trying to work with their passions of reading with the kind of pre-K age. One of the biggest ways that they're going to learn through child-led play and child-led learning. No one's going to be able to get a 3-year-old to sit down at a desk and work for an hour. And so something that we like to do here is to choose the books that we're reading, sitting down and making that an activity. I'm not reading at them, I'm reading with them. I'm pointing to the words, pointing to the pictures, and they're having fun with it. It's like an adventure. Allowing letters and blocks with letters on them to be integrated into their dramatic play. They're so excited to learn, and I think giving that information to parents so that they can set in their own children and kind of partnering with them to equip their children to keep learning in a way that's productive for them. We're seeing a lot of growth, and it's really exciting.
That is exciting, and really that's what it's all about, right? And I think Michigan's done a good job of, with our investments in our 4-year-old pre-K program over the past several years now, and really that being a priority of the governors for the majority of her tenure here as governor of Michigan. But now, really, where the key is, as Elliot said, connecting that to the efforts that we're seeing at the K-12 level as well. So, Elliot, let's talk about a little more specifically. What are some of the states specifically doing to draw that connection between early childhood systems and K-12 systems so that there is the opportunity for that continued growth for student achievement?
Sure. Well, I mean, a lot of the national conversation lately has been what are called the Southern Surge states, right? With Mississippi probably the most prominent among them, but also Tennessee, Alabama, and Louisiana are some of the states that have, on national data, shown improvement in early literacy. And all of those are states that, in their different ways, have an intentional early learning strategy. But Mississippi, which is the one that probably gets talked about the most, right? Again, they were really thinking about this at the curricular level, right? And how do you make sure that the curriculum being used in early childhood is connected to the curriculums being used in in early elementary, and that this again goes to the science of reading and making sure that, so for example, when Brianna was talking about like working with the kids to choose books, that's a great idea. And how do you make sure that all of the books that are in the candidate pool are books that are developmentally appropriate, are helping kids move forward, right? Again, recognizing that each kid in the room is developing somewhat differently, but that there are things that the state can do to sort of create a context where the choices that teachers are making are more likely to be successful. Because again, there are, and there's a certain amount of training and support that you can provide to teachers that if you aren't providing that, you're going to see less consistency and have more catch up to do when you get into those later grades. So again, all of those states in their different ways. I know Louisiana's been really aggressive about curricular choices is one of their focuses, but that really making sure that that's happening and also supporting at the local level those conversations and connections between early childhood providers and schools, because school districts are not always set up to have those conversations in an easy way, nor is the early childhood community always set up to have, the early childhood community is very diverse. There's a lot of different kinds of providers. And so it takes some amount of capacity to organize that conversation at a local level. And that's really a key piece of the equation as well.
Awesome. Yes. And that's the whole idea, right? And really, the idea is also to build upon some of the investments that we've seen on the early childhood front. So, Christy, let's shift to you. So let's talk a little bit about improving literacy across childhood. So we've seen, some significant investments in recent years, most notably, obviously, the expansion of our Great Start Readiness program to become universal. But let's talk about other things like early on and some other investments that we're seeing, or maybe areas we should be focusing more on around early childhood and what role they can play in literacy. So from your perspective, Christy, what are some of those things that we should be looking at from the early childhood perspective?
So we know that the administration's really invested in early on significantly over the course of this administration. We've seen significant increases in early on funding. However, we also know that it's not enough. And so when we think about infants and toddlers and literacy, we sometimes don't connect the importance of their development with reading. And what's important for us to understand is that the importance of early intervention for infants and toddlers with developmental delays really connects closely with the science of reading, because both are grounded in research about how the brain develops and how language and literacy skills emerge. Early support during the first years of life builds that foundation that later reading depends on. And so, for example, brain development happens fastest in the early years. The brain forms those neural connections most rapidly from birth to about age 3. And during that time, experiences with spoken language, sounds, interaction really shape those neural pathways needed for reading. And the science of reading explains that reading is not a natural process. The brain must build those networks that connect speech, sounds, letters, and meaning. And early intervention really helps children with those developmental delays strengthen those foundational language systems before formal reading instruction begins. And there are other Oral language is the foundation of reading. We know that the science of reading talks about word recognition and language comprehension. And so for infants and toddlers with developmental delays, early intervention can target vocabulary growth, listening comprehension, social communication, sound and speech development. And we know that vocabulary at age 3 is predictive of reading at 3rd grade. And so we really need to strengthen our investment in early intervention and consider it to be an important part of our strategy for literacy in Michigan.
Absolutely. And I think you really, you can start to see the plan when you think about building on top of these investments, right? So if we make the right investments, like in early on and in these programs designed at or aimed at infants and toddlers, and we continue that with our support and investment in our universal pre-K program and even expanding that into some areas for 3-year-olds, that we've done as well. And then we can get into the early elementary stage and talk about these letters trainings and other things and the science of reading and really giving the teachers the supports that they need. Then the idea is then we will start to see, we make those investments, we layer those investments and stay committed to them. We will start to see those numbers change and get Michigan back to a respectable ranking when we talk about literacy. So Michelle, let's talk a little bit more in detail about the governor's proposal itself. And obviously, so many issues around school funding or school and education come down to funding. But what about in particular in the governor's proposal do you think hits the mark as far as giving the support to, like you talked about, to putting the structure in place at the ISD level as well as at the local LEA level to be able to support the teachers in a way that will give them the best chance to be successful?
There's a lot of promising components to what is in the proposed budget, including that we would be expanding support to grades 6 through 12. Knowing that we have students who are in those grades struggling and teachers may not have either experience or access or even the knowledge to help support them. So the expansion of support through grades 12, including extended learning opportunities, tutoring, all of those components will help us really think pre-K to 12 as a system. Her expansion of literacy coaching, although we've had a great investment in coaching, we still don't have enough literacy coaches to support the work the way it should be looking. And so seeing that increase, seeing the additional funding for letters and for instructional materials, high quality instructional materials are important, especially knowing we have educators in our state who are getting their teaching certificate through an alternate path. They may not have gone through a traditional experience at a university. We have a teacher shortage. So making sure they have the materials and the training that they need so that we can create that structure and system. And I think you said something, Matt, important, that you said sustained funding. This is never going to be a one-time deal. We're not going to fix it with one blast of funding. It's got to be sustained funding that is being fed into a system that will create capacity within Michigan schools to keep this work going and to see those outcomes increase over time.
Yeah, and I think that's fortunately for us in Michigan, that's one area where we might be a little bit ahead of the curve, is that we do have that coordination. We've kind of been forced into that coordination because of the massive state investment we've made into pre-K and really in a mixed delivery model in bringing providers from across all, public and private together. So we do have the structures in place to provide that support or to at least had the connections between these pre-K providers. But now I think the trick is, and the key from Michigan's children's standpoint, with this somewhat newfound investment and approach into this science of reading and the letters training, really from pre-K through 12, is really making sure that that is realized at the pre-K level and at the early childhood level, even prior to pre-K, ideally from our standpoint, but providing that support and training. So are there any states that you can think of off the top of your head that have really done a good job of providing that support and training to the early childhood educators in particular on this issue?
It's an interesting question. I mean, certainly all of those southern surge states have early childhood programs and services that they have funded and that they have made some effort to ensure are successful, right? I mean, Tennessee, and actually in some ways, is a really interesting example because famously, there's a study of Tennessee pre-K that showed that it wasn't achieving the results that it was designed for. And that study is based on a cohort from early in the pre-K program's development. And it's sometimes used as an argument for not investing in pre-K. But what actually happened in Tennessee is they looked at that data and said, oh, we need to make our pre-K program better and improve the quality of it in ways that hopefully over time, and again, they haven't fully studied this yet, but that are hopefully going to prove to be meaningful. I do also, while we're in the southern neighborhood, want to really call out some of the work that's gone on in Virginia the last few years, where they've had very strong leadership and are really focused on data and classroom quality, right? And using tools, when we rate early childhood programs, historically, a lot of the ways we've done that have focused on what amount to sort of bureaucratic measures that you can sort of lock in place on the first day of the school year, and the actual experience children are having doesn't always have as much impact on a program's rating. Whereas Virginia is really trying to restructure around like what is the experience that children are actually having, and how are we supporting providers to deliver that experience on a consistent basis. So those are some practices that I think are really promising for other states to think about.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, that's the one key takeaway that you can learn from other states that have shown improvement and shown success in improving their literacy rates, is that continued investment, that commitment to a program and continued investment at the state level aimed at those defined goals. And that's what we're seeing here in the governor's proposal. We're excited about it at Michigan's Children. We know you are as well. So Brianna, let's talk about from your experience. So when you think about supports, and opportunities and trainings for early childhood educators, how do you feel you are supported either from the state or from your employer? And what do you think are some things that maybe, the state in this case or even the ISD or others or local early childhood systems could provide to early childhood educators to even, create more opportunities for you to be successful?
Absolutely. Something I was really grateful for recently was we all of the leads here were able to go to the MIAUIC conference, and so that was like 3 days packed of learning for all of us, which I think it was immediately applicable to our jobs starting on Monday, which was fantastic. We have felt really grateful here. Specifically, our leadership team will often bring in different speakers. We had Turning Pages come in, I think our last month staff meeting, and just kind of as a precursor to March being Literacy Month. And that was really helpful. They gave us kind of a workbook to go off of for working in our classroom with our children, specifically with like rhyming and kind of developing different activities for them to be learning about literacy on their end. But yeah, I have personally felt really incredibly supported by my leadership team here. And I think, I can't speak for any other early childhood centers here in Michigan. I think that just guessing, we might kind of be an outlier with the amount of support we get. Not every place can afford to go to a 3-day conference with 15 staff. And so again, as much as I wish I knew of more of the policy side of stuff, having funding to be able to educate our educators would make a huge difference. I just know for myself, like I have a background in psychology. And so having that foundation, as well as having the foundation of education that my leadership is bringing me, I feel like I'm able to watch my kids grow in all of their strengths, specifically literarily. And it's hard to know that there are some places who can't gain those extra learning spaces. So yeah, I think having more funding for teachers to learn more and be able to go to conferences, have visitors from places like Turning Pages, I think would really, really help us to support our children and their growth.
Absolutely. No, well, at Michigan's Children, we couldn't agree with you more. And we've fought for years and we continue to fight for just basic level funding for the programs to be able to keep teachers like yourself in the classrooms and not having to pursue jobs in different fields because of the poor pay and benefit structure that we have, unfortunately, in this system. But now we're actually getting people to understand that there's more to it even than just that. Yes, we have to do that, but we also have to provide the supports and services for the educators in the classrooms to be successful. And it's great that you have an employer and you work for an organization that supports you in that, but there are a lot of others that are struggling. And so we think it's very critical that the state recognizes this, and that as we talk about state investments, public investments into literacy, that this is a critical component of it and something that certainly should be included. So give me some final words here. If advocates, anybody, families, anybody who's listening to this, that is excited about it, recognizes the importance of literacy in education, and wants to show their support for Michigan building a better system around literacy. This is a time, right? I mean, the governor's proposed her budget proposal. The legislature is currently working on their versions, and this budget process will play out for the next couple of months. But what's your kind of closing thought here to anybody who's listening about why this is important and why they should let their legislators and others know that investments in literacy are a key component for our state moving forward?
The only thing I'd add, and I really appreciate having the chance to have this conversation, and Brianna, thanks so much for talking about your experience. And the only thing I would add is that the states that are making an impact, part of it is having the data to understand the impact that you're making, right? Mm-hmm. So identifying what is it we're trying to accomplish, how are we measuring that, and what incremental improvement or not improvement are we seeing over time? And then if we are seeing improvement, how do we double down on the strategies we think are causing that improvement? And if we're not seeing improvement, how do we adjust course so that we are in fact changing something? Because if you really want to get better, you need to know how you're doing and have a sense of what you're trying to accomplish. And that is something that a lot of states have struggled with, but that some states are really taking some initiative to try to figure out. And so the issue of this, like whatever strategy the state's going to have, it's measurable. And in the K-12 world, it's going to be measured. And while I'm totally opposed to high stakes accountability tests for young children, that there are developmentally appropriate assessments that you can use to get some sense of what's going on. There are tools to measure classroom quality. And again, there has to be leadership from the state level and a conversation with providers about what those tools are and how they're going to be used. But that if you're not using those tools, then all of this is going to be really well-meaning, but you're not going to know whether the money you're spending is having the impact intended.
Sure, I would just say that literacy starts at birth, right? Remember our infants and toddlers when we're thinking about our literacy strategy in Michigan. We can be part of, and we are an important part of Michigan's success for learning and reading.
And I would add, it's not just about one program or one training. It's about building a coherent system from birth through high school, where research, instruction, coaching, leadership, and funding all work together to give students what they need for literacy outcomes to improve.
Absolutely. No, I couldn't agree more. And the pure political reality of it is the accountability is incredibly important and required. Michigan's a purple state, and we have divided government right now in our legislature, and we're not going to get anything funded unless there's some levels of accountability that we're going to actually achieve what it is we're trying to achieve with that funding. And I couldn't agree with you more. Well, I want to thank our guest, Brianna Craig from Big Steps, Little Feet, a pre-K teacher doing the work on a daily basis to make Michigan a better place to be a kid and to raise a family, and Elliot Regenstein from the Foresight Law and Policy Group from Chicago, Del Goley from the Michigan Association of Intermediate School Administrators, and Christy Callahan from Clinton County RESA for joining us today and for the work that they're doing every day to make their communities in the state of Michigan a better place to be a kid and to raise a family. And if you want to get more information about this issue or other issues that we cover on the podcast, please tune in as always to michiganschildren.org. Thanks.
You've been listening to Speaking for Kids, the podcast for Michigan's children with host Matt Gillard. Thanks for joining us. To explore these and other issues relevant to our state's children, youth, and families, and to build your advocacy muscle, go to our website at www.michiganschildren.org. You'll find links and news about past and future podcast topics under our Resource tab and action alerts under the Take Action tab. Find and like us on Facebook and Twitter. Stephen Wallace produced this podcast. Contact them with your questions and ideas for other topics. Michigan's Children is a nonprofit advocacy organization, an independent voice working to reduce disparities in child outcomes from cradle to career through policy change.